Hey Michael, figured I'd make a practice video before I do an actual overview of the 500 swap Grom. So starting off with the 2015 Grom, I used a 2015 Honda CB500F harness, dash, engine, throttle body, everything basically to make the engine run mechanically. The frame, I had to cut out the center section, the single frame rail that's stock on the Groms, make my own parallel frame rails or twin spar frame rails, and then made my own kick downs for the front of the engine. And I made kind of like a T out of some 1-inch, 1/8-inch wall piping where it bolts into the engine and then bolts up. That's kind of important because those mounts are pretty far in. So if you were to just make this one piece, it obviously wouldn't get past the jug or the head. So did that on both sides. And this was just kind of my way of making it so that you could actually take the engine out if you had a problem or wanted to switch something up or do any other work where you need to drop the engine. So those are the two front mounts. Then I utilized the frame rails that I put in to put a mount at the back of the head. So here is just 3/16 plate with a bolt into the back of the head. And then on this side, same deal. It's just a little bit more clearance on this side. One big thing with the 500s is the water neck and thermostat housing. So I had to come up with this funky deal and then put a fill port because it's higher than the radiator. But this was my way of getting around, not flipping the actual elbow and trying to either cut that piece off and weld it opposite so that it came down and out. So to remedy that, one, my frame rails aren't super wide, because if you would have went any wider, you'd have to space this out a decent amount. How I spaced it out is just a 1/4-inch kind of adapter made out of aluminum. Just hole sawed it, drilled a couple holes, and gray RTV'd it, and that worked great. Gave me just enough room. So that's one thing to consider. So that's the main frame modifications. Then in the back, I essentially trimmed out a decent amount of the factory frame back here that goes to the swing arm and the pegs. And I just made standoffs. Oh, you don't even know if you can see it, but I just made, yeah, not gonna be able to see it, but I made standoffs, okay. And then made the factory 500 bolts work. And those are all braced. It's 1/8-inch steel, and then it's braced, kind of boxed in and gusseted onto the actual frame. Same with the top. I actually just bent a little tube, I'm sorry, plate steel that went from the inside of the frame rail, bent out, and then went around the actual mounts on the engine. And then this is braced and gusseted inside and below it. So those are the 4 mounts to get it in there. I will say that I did a lot of, it's easier if I go to this side. I did do a lot of side profile measuring and mocking up. So I had the engine in front of it and I kind of got down at eye level and looked at what I needed. Because getting the angle of the engine is pretty important. 1, to get enough clearance with the oil pan, and then 2, to have enough room to still utilize the gas tank. And one of the biggest reasons is to give you enough room in the front to run the header and the radiator. Because obviously if it was tipped down any more, then the radiator would be pushed out. And basically I've got this tucked up as close as I can get, as forward and as tilted as I can get to 1, the factory, and then 2, to maintain the left and right lock of the stock Grom. That was a big thing I was going for. You obviously don't have to do this. It could be out another inch and a half. You just wouldn't be able to turn the forks to their limit on the stock triple mount. As far as like the radiator, same deal, CB500 radiator, just used a 12-volt fan. The radiator's fine. The fan works unless you're sitting in like really hot traffic. It'll get hot. But as soon as you start moving, temps come down to normal operating temps, 170, 180. The header is just an eBay header. one, just to keep it cheap, and two, I didn't know if I was gonna have to modify it. Didn't have to modify it, but if I did, you know, I wouldn't feel bad about cutting an inch out and tucking it up. And it's just got a Kaufman kind of bullet style exhaust or muffler on it. I did have to get creative to use the stock pegs. I made kind of my own makeshift spacers, and it's just kind of a budget thing. And it was just kind of be creative. So I've got a 3/4 inch nut in there and then a couple washers that kind of spaces the pegs out. If I were to do it again, I would just go with the Amazon pegs or rear sets. It's just a cheap alternative. And then on top of it, you don't have to have this kind of C shape sticking into the front of the engine. Because if I had the other rear sets, I could have moved the engine back a little bit farther. But, you know, hindsight's 20/20, and then if I moved it back, I'd obviously have problems there. But, yeah, that's kind of the gist of it, getting everything mounted in there. Again, I'll just stress that, like, I took a lot of side profile measurements and looked at it a lot. Probably still not enough. So, as far as the wiring goes, it's all factory. I did have a quick shifter hooked up here that cut sparks, so I got some tape. The thing you're gonna run into is the gas tank and then the coils. So the coils, I didn't want to mess with them at all because I had it all running. And if I wanted to make it prettier, I'd probably mount the coils over here and here. But the coils are kind of just sitting on top and it's been fine. Another thing is, I believe this, I don't know if this is a throttle position or IAC valve or what, but this sensor I had to flip because otherwise it'd be sticking up into the gas tank. Then the other thing is, if you plan on running filters, I would try to find something small because there's absolutely no, well, I suppose if you made the gas tank a lot smaller, you could maybe run a filter or airbox setup, but this is kind of limited space, so I'm actually just running a small kind of fabric filter. It's one of those little sleeves you stick on like K&N filters. Then the next biggest thing is the gas tank. And this is why I don't want to show this, because this is actually horrible. But it was my first time welding the gas tank and trying to seal it. It just kind of went the way it went, and it's not pretty, but it's functional. So here's the gas tank. So I put it up, but I cut off basically the bottom, kept this factory mount, and then cut the bottom out. You can kind of see in the profile. Basically took inch and a half out of it, and then I made my own jug to fit the factory hat. That's the factory hat or fuel pump adapter off the CB500F that I welded in there so that the pump, if I can get this to work out here. So essentially the pump sits up in there and then the arm goes up and over so that you still have the fuel gauge. Fuel gauge still operates and you can hold a little bit more fuel. With that little, with the bottom cut out and my little jug, you can get about 65 miles out of this. Haven't ran it totally dry because there's no need. This wasn't meant to be like get on and take a ride around the world. It was kind of just a fun grocery getter deal. Yeah, that's about it, man. It seems like a lot, but then again, it doesn't seem like a lot. Once it's all together, it looks pretty easy, but getting it to this point was a little tough. But if you got a welder and a tubing bender, you can pretty much make work whatever you want. Another thing is that on the OG 2015, I think it's 14, 15, might be 16s, I don't know. But the dash is actually the same from the 500 and the Groms. There's just a back piece that you have to, take off the Grom and put on the 500, do a little bit of trimming, but then everything plugs in. Another thing, and this is why I haven't made this video yet, but the hand controls. So that I kind of grouped that with all the wiring, but the hand controls, And then the clutch lever, cable, throttle cables is all off the 500 as well. I did put a stabilizer on here at one point. You don't need a stabilizer, but you start getting around 70, 80 miles an hour, that front starts feeling real twitchy. So it's not necessary. That's why I took it off to sell it, put it on my other bike, but this is it. And then the factory body work, don't think I have that out here, but I can make another video about the body work. But essentially I just had to make the little black pieces. I had to cut around the clutch cable, and on the other side, I believe I just had to cut out, I had to make like a little hole for the thermostat and then kind of notch it out for all my wiring. All my wiring just basically pushes up against the side of the engine. You can see it a little bit when it's together, but you really have to look. It's good from afar, but far from good. That's what I say. I guess another thing is the shift linkage. Basically just modified it to work. I actually used the factory Grom linkage. I just made my own L because obviously this engine's whatever, almost 3 inches wider once you get it all centered up. I think I'm gonna make another video about the rear sprockets and chain. So let me know if you need anything else. I'm gonna make another video about the sprockets and the chain.